Hi everybody. Hi everybody out there. Welcome to week 9. We're banging away here. Let's talk about a little bit of housework. How did your data analysis 2 go? I'm going to have a look at them this week, but how did it feel?
I liked it a lot.
You did? Okay.
I asked one friend of mine in Lebanon to record herself speaking with another participant. She had a conversation with her sister, and it really felt like it was so natural, like it was so obvious that they weren't thinking about it.
Right. So how did it match with Goffman's constraints? Did you get some nice, yeah.
Lots of overlapping.
Okay, good, good. Okay, good. Lucy, Jade, Mimi?
I did a several conversation. So I asked one of my friends to have a phone call with her friend. And both of them, they are like advanced level. So I didn't see a lot of like differences between like native or non-native, because their proficiency level is really advanced. And they both lived in United States for couple of years, but it's because it's the phone call, cell phone conversation, so it's not exactly the same like the face-to-face one. Right.
So those system constraints are going to be a little bit different for phone call conversations.
A lot of pauses.
Good.
Yes, and long pauses or short ones.
Yeah.
And they do have some like a lot of prominence there because they want to emphasize some points.
Yeah.
And I think they're more than face-to-face conversation.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
It's
good.
Interesting, but I try to find some differences like pronunciation or something like that between native and non-native, but I didn't find any. So just see some like features of my cell phone conversation.
Interesting. Okay, good. And Mimi and Jade, okay?
I actually recorded 2 of my friends, so they were like face-to-face. They had face-to-face conversation. It was like a topic shift in the middle of the conversation. I found some sort of like there were like a lot of overlaps, but like there were like content information that you can guess why that overlap happened. So I actually wrote some things, and I'm sort of like really curious to see your comments about it, because I'm not sure what I actually guessed was right. So,
okay. Yeah, so there's a difference between sort of supported ideas that you can support, right, based on the language and the context, and sort of general guesswork that doesn't belong. So I'll be interested to look. Now, I was clear when I want to check that I was clear. It's okay. Jade, for everybody else, Jade asked me if she could do her transcription in Excel because it's easier to do the overlap and the latch. And yes, you can, but you can't give it to me in Excel, right? You have to copy and paste it out of it, because there's no publication on the planet at this point in time that's going to accept a discourse analysis transcript in Excel, right? So you can do it whatever way is easier, but sooner or later you've got to copy and paste it out of there and stick it in a regular format like the transcription format I gave you. Okay.
Yeah, I actually sort of like copy paste, and then I took a picture because I couldn't put the overlap marks as the actually paper that you gave us, the annotation, the transcription notation.
Yeah, annotations, right.
So like I actually put it like manually, and I took a picture, and then
yeah, so you can do a PDF.
Yeah.
That's fine. Yeah.
Okay, if we put the overlaps in those brackets, because that's what we did for the other corpus annotation.
Did you follow the notation sheet I gave you for this particular thing? Then
So
you should be good.
Use that one instead.
You should.
Okay.
Yeah, you want to. I mean, I gave you an annotation transcription, so that's the one that you want to use. Yeah. Yeah.
Well, mine was I I went initially to interview 2 Nigerian students here who are roommates, but then a friend of theirs came in and entered the conversation.
Oh, so you have
So I had a
multi-party talk. All right.
Which is really interesting because I got to see what really piqued my interest was the turn organization that they did, how some of them were able to hold the floor and some would interrupt, and the way how it works was really interesting.
Good.
I saw that they would like these prominence things. I haven't really run it through any like Pratt or anything, but just from listening, I noticed that they put a falling tone when, like, usually at the end of a question, like a yes or no question, they would use that. But for an open-ended question, they would use a rising tone, which I thought was interesting. And then they to hold the floor, they would use more of a falling tone. But to start, the tone units would start with the rising tone,
or a higher pitch register. Yeah. Good. Awesome. Well, I'm really looking forward to seeing everybody's. Be patient because there's a lot of data, so it takes me time to get through those. All right, the Pickering and Bird book chapter that we talked about last week. Thank you, Nana. That is copied and available to you under a submodule for this week. But you remember it was about the difference between what students need, what international non-native speaking students need to know about the difference in structural markers in reading and writing versus the kind of structural markers you get in speech, which are very, very different, right? So even though they might be familiar with what they find in a written text, they might not be listening for the right kind of structural markers in a lecture, right? So that's pure interest reading for you if you're interested. For this week, you're going to do a reading post, which is at the end of the PowerPoint as usual. Don't forget that your annotated articles and proposals are due on November the 4th. That's a couple of weeks. Go back to PowerPoint for week 6 if you want details on what we discussed. There's also details in your syllabus, but that's the PowerPoint that we spent some time talking about it. Questions? Okay. So today what you read about was roles and relationships in discourse, right? And how they are linguistically managed. And we want to be sure that we understand, although we deal with paralinguistic behaviors and nonverbal behaviors as well, very much so with the spoken discourse, we always want to ground our discussion of things like power, solidarity, and so on in the linguistics rather than in the, if we were doing psychology, we might do it in the psychological, or if we were doing sociology, we might do it, we're going to ground it very much in the linguistics. Now, that doesn't mean that it doesn't apply across all these other places as well. Just before we do that, we get a couple shout outs to people out there on the reading post from last week. Matthew, I thought this was really interesting. He said he just completed his first 8-week course teaching composition 2 for ESOL. And this is related to what we did last week on coherence and cohesion, right? They were working on writing paragraphs to compare and contrast. And then this was the interesting bit. One of the components of the rubric I noticed made a noticeable difference between the rough drafts and the final drafts was the use of transition words. So what would that be? Coherence or cohesion?
Cohesion.
Well, yeah. Obviously, there's an overlap between coherence and cohesion, right? But remember that coherence really is this script and frame idea, like you know what the next move is going to be. And cohesion is the little linguistic markers that hold it together, such as transition words like however. So I thought this was great that he was specifically now looking at, he said that the textbook that they use provided the students with a list of appropriate transition words for each of the different paragraph styles. I noticed the students' initial draft often lacked cohesion, but once they applied the transitional recommendations, their paragraphs became much easier to read, okay? So this is one thing where direct instruction in something like improving cohesion can help. And our second is to Natalia. Hi, Natalia. So a couple of people mentioned this, but I put in Natalia as the example. Another typical characteristic of miscommunication in L2 writing is the literal translation from students L1, right? So this can be obviously at an utterance level, but this can also go across utterances in the sense that you've got one utterance that is sort of English sounding, and then the next one is sort of off with the fairies in terms of the structure. So especially when native language idiomatic expressions are involved, I usually pull these problematic sentences from students' paragraph and include them in the next class editing exercises. This is something I used to do all the time when I was teaching ESL writing. Anonymously pull things from students' papers and put them up and have us all work on them. Why? Because usually if one person is doing it, another person is doing it. If you've got one Spanish person in there doing it, you've probably got another 3 or 4 in there doing it. If you've got a homogeneous classroom where they're all Spanish, even better, right? Because often these, what we might call gross L1 transfer errors that everybody makes can be really nicely done. Here's what Natalia does. She has them participate in a revising group activity where they must answer the list of questions provided by the teacher on how to make their paragraphs more coherent and cohesive. It's amazing to watch students' analytical ability when they collaborate in what I call linguistic circles in small groups. Now, I'd never heard of the term linguistic circles. Natalia, I don't know if you made up the term linguistic circles or it comes from somewhere, but I like it a lot. I think linguistic circles is a lovely thing to call it, because basically you're saying in this circle what we're focused on is improving this coherence and this cohesion, not, you know, whether you've made a content. It's not about content, it's about structure. So as much as you focus on content, you also want to focus on structure. So thanks, guys, that was great. So now let's move to the reading for this week in your chapter. Let's grab my book, which was on roles and relationships. Did you enjoy this one? Yeah. Nothing like talking about power and solidarity to all right, so it's actually another way you can look at this is who gets to shape the discourse, right? And we've talked about this before. Who gets the power to say what the discourse is going to look like, and how do those positions get taken linguistically? How do we signal those relationships linguistically, right? So last week we had looked at the dominant culture of Western writing, right? You remember we looked at Kaplan's doodles and we said there wasn't anything particularly logical about the way we do it compared to the way anybody else does it. It just, that's the way it is, right? That's the prevailing powerful model. We've also looked at dominant speech communities. So traditional Englishes, American, British, Canadian, versus speakers of non-dominant speech communities, New Englishes, Indian English, African English, and so on, and how that could be marginalized, right? So these are both clear examples. I mean, this is all overlapping. This is both clear examples of power, right? Linguistic power, and how linguistic power is realized in those two different contexts, right? We talked about that specific context of writing where we said, linguistic power is clearly realized in things like American-based publications, because we can't find any Indian English, African English speakers. So, and this is in most cases institutionally conferred power, right? So by that we mean it's sort of integrated into the system. And if you want to push back, you've got to push back against an institutional issue, right? So we talked about the fact that in TESOL Quarterly, when I was there on the editorial board, we pushed back by deliberately targeting a Malaysian English speaker and saying, we will help you understand these reviews and do this, because clearly it's institutionally conferred. There was no other new varieties of English in there. Okay, so these are all different examples. This one we're going to look at, I've got some sound files and things for you, but I realized that this is not, I need to show you something in a second. So one example of institutionally conferred power is teacher-student discourse, right? And we're all clear on that, because that's why you're all sitting there silently listening to me go on and on. And when I say things like, okay, you all nicely nod your heads to show me that you are listening and not in fact looking at your Facebook. So we all know that this is institutionally conferred power. So what are some of the ways in which this is reflected and reinforced? This asymmetrical interaction, meaning that I have the power, you have the power when you are the teacher, and the student does not, in terms of control of the discourse, right? So I get to control it, not you, okay? Unless I invite you. So one of the ways that that works is an IRF exchange, which we've talked about before. Can someone give me an example of an IRF exchange? Could anyone remember what one of those exchanges? Did we not talk about this before? The way that you're all looking at me makes me think that I'm maybe wrong. So initiation would be the teacher saying, yeah.
When you asked us about the, let's say, the discourse analysis too, we responded.
Yeah. So, but let's talk about it in terms of like a question answer response. So teacher initiation would be, Mimi, what is 5 times 7? And me, I should have picked it much easier. Okay, wait. Mimi, what's 7 times 7?
49.
Naughty, very naughty, Jane. That's not what So in fact, interestingly, that's an example of how you socialize your students in a classroom, right? If you'd done that in a high school, you'd have been told off, right? I didn't ask you, I asked her. Yeah, I asked her. So yes, she says 49, I say excellent. Okay, so the initiation is mine, the feedback is hers, the response is hers, the feedback is mine. Why is there a power play?
You started the conversation.
Good, because I started and I ended. I started and I ended, okay? She doesn't get to. If she then says, well, of course, everyone knows that, or something like that, right? That would be completely out of the frame, okay? And not, because it's my thing to start and end. What about display questions? What are display questions?
Actually sort of not looking for information.
Good.
For example, I mean, we talked about it, right? Like something, or like, you know, some sort of, I don't have any.
No, display question, well, think about it in terms of, if I'm asking you something I genuinely want to know from you.
Yeah, that's exactly.
Or, huh?
Rhetorical question?
Yeah, essentially it is, right? Because I'm asking you something that I know the answer to, and you know you're supposed to know the answer to,
Yeah.
right? So I actually don't want to hear anything from you about yourself, you know, or what you think about something. I literally just say, so let's say we just learned to tell the time, you know. Jade, what's the time? You know, Jade says, you know, 5 to 6 or 5:55 as you would in this, or 5:55, I guess. Anyway, whatever it is, no, 4:55. 4:55, right, enough. And I say, good, thank you very much. Again, right? It's acknowledgement that I get to ask you maybe even stupid questions if I want to, and you have to answer them, right? What about nonverbals and paralinguistic signals? There's one thing that I know I do. If somebody, right, so one thing is, if more than one person, I will signal who gets to answer that question. What else?
Nodding, smiling.
Yeah, but you can nod and smile back at me. I'm talking about nonverbals or paralinguistics that I can use, but that you can't.
If I want to take it into like my culture, the tone, it has to be lower than the teacher, so the teacher can raise.
Really? Now, do you mean the volume or the pitch, or both?
Both.
Both. Oh, no, that's super interesting. That is super interesting. Yeah.
Only if you want to be rude, like, because some students might answer back.
Right.
Like then they would be kind of, you know, punished for it.
Now you see, that's interesting, right? Because that's where we're going to next. So it turns out that we have a set of regular, and those of you that have done sound systems with me know this, but we have regular intonation patterns and then dominant ones, right? So this is one of the things that I've done in my book. And so what you're going to now hear is Mark Hazlitt, our wonderful KERA person, doing examples of this, right? And I want you to listen to A and listen to B, and then tell me what you think the difference is, okay?
Peter, stop it. B, Peter, stop it.
Can we play it again?
Peter, stop it. B, Peter, stop it.
What's the difference? Not quite. It is a difference in tone.
Volume?
Okay, this it's true. The second one is definitely louder and higher pitched, right? Which is, but the other thing he's doing is this difference, which you'll hear better the next time around, is this difference between a falling tone, Peter, stop it, Peter, stop it, and Peter, stop it, right? Which is this riseful tone, which is the dominant tone, which also, because it's longer, gives you that higher lengthened sense as well. So that's what the tonal difference is between them. So in fact, that was what was indicated on here, but it's all changed into little funky things. Let me play it again so you can hear it.
Peter, stop it. B, Peter, stop it.
Okay, so
Peter.
Yeah, stop, Mark. this is happening to me every time I was playing this at home. I was like, Mark, stop. So here's one that actually made a difference. This is an interaction between an ITA, so an international teaching assistant, and a student, when it looked like a student might have a question. Okay, so if we look at the lexical form, ostensibly it seems like a polite lexical form. It's got a please in it, but it was clear from the negative reactions of the observer of this class, which was me, and the other students in this class, who all turned round and glared at the student in question, that this response was perceived as highly disrespectful. Why might the observers interpret the interaction this way? Okay, so Mark and I are going to do it and see if you can.
And are there any questions?
No, just go on, please.
For some reason, it's cutting off the beginning of these sound files, and I have no idea why, but let's try again.
And are there any questions? Does everyone understand? Are there any questions?
No, just go on, please.
Okay, does it sound disrespectful?
Yeah.
Yeah. And what are you hearing, Sandy?
Just go on.
Go on, please.
Yes.
What was this? This, long, high up and down, and part of the reason that we don't like it as listeners that are sensitive to the intonation contour, or native speaker listeners also, is because it's completely wrong, right? Because it attacks her status as the class teacher, right? And we find this a lot with international teachers, teaching assistants. So the use of the dominant tone here highlights the often ambiguous status that international teaching assistants find themselves in. On the one hand, they carry the rank and the power of the institution. So they are teaching assistants. They are going to grade your work. On the other hand, their students are usually more linguistically and culturally competent in an American classroom in that context than the international teaching assistant. And so this happens not inconsiderably with not with people like Sandy. We've talked about this before, because Sandy is Spanish and teaching Spanish. They are quite happy to have Sandy be so these are the people that are teaching chemistry or math or physics or so on. So this example actually happened in math. I think that happened. And when I went over it with the international teaching assistant, she had no idea what just happened. She just thought it was fine, But everybody else in the classroom was completely aware of that. So one way that you can minimize power differences is through indexicality, right? What we choose, how we choose to refer to somebody else. We can either maximize the power difference or we can minimize it. And in your book, they talk about this as small choices among words or phrasing that can index affiliation or disaffiliation, right? In the case of asymmetrical interaction, like that between a teacher and a student, disaffiliation is emphasizing the power, particularly in an American classroom, right, where we're all supposed to be hippie happy with each other. You can, if you maximize the disaffiliation, you're maximizing the power. And if you minimize, you're minimizing, right? So I want you to read those two teaching statements. These are statements by, two possible statements by a teacher. I want you to read number 1 and then read number 2 and then tell me what the difference is between them. So at home, make sure that that's what you're doing. We're going to take a minute and let you read both sentences before we discuss it. Yeah, okay, so hold on a second. Let's read these out. Statement number 1, people think that in physics, measurement is always exact. But we physicists know that isn't true. Now, I'm going to show you what I mean by that. People think that in physics, measurement is always exact, but actually that isn't true. Now, let's look at what we mean by that. What's the difference there? Jade, you were about to.
So the first one actually shows that the teacher is actually exerting the power and showing that we physicists know that. So I am actually part of that group, and I'm part of that knowledgeable group. And I, as a knowledgeable person here, is going to show you.
Yeah.
But in the second part, like there is no pronoun. So
Right.
she or he is actually putting herself out of the context and saying, okay, let's do this. Let me show you that. Let's look at this all together, you know.
Yeah, it's not let me show you, right?
Okay,
It's
yeah, sorry.
let us
Yeah, let
look at it
us.
all together. Yeah, that's exactly correct. So what does that do? How does that change the impression? Someone other than, yeah, Mimi.
It's a sense of belonging.
Make sure you're nice and loud so people at home can hear you. That's okay.
It creates this sense of belongingness because the teacher is affirming that they're all part of a community of practice.
Right. Okay, good. Excellent. A community of practice was something that came up in your book, right? So in the first one, there's a deliberate exclusionary thing, right? I'm one of the physicists that knows this. Y'all are not the physicists and you don't know this, right? It's deliberately exclusionary and emphasizes the power differential. In this case, not just in the classroom, but the power of knowledge and so on, right? And in the second one, there's this much more inclusionary thing, right? We as a group, I will lead you, facilitate this discussion as to what this is, but we are doing this together, right? So this is something that's come up a lot in not just international teaching assistants, but also regular teaching assistant training, that we should do this, that I should say, oh, and, you know, let's do this and let's go on a journey together, which I'm all into, by the way. But can we think of any possible drawbacks?
The separation between the teacher and the student, that gap, like there is not much communication because I clearly show that I am above you guys, students.
Okay, which one are we talking about?
The one showing power.
The first one or the second one?
First one.
First one, right. So is that a drawback or a...
I would think of that as a drawback, like it is separating the teacher.
Right.
The communication
Right.
is like I'm clearly stating that I am not unequal, so you owe me respect, and
Right.
so we cannot communicate.
Right. So what the teacher training stuff says is don't do that, right? Don't do that because of that exact reason. Do it like number 2. But can we think of any drawbacks about doing it like number 2? And Nana was about to. Yeah.
Maybe the students might like doubt the confidence in the teacher's skill, like as if the teacher is not announcing that, you know, I'm the knowledgeable in physics.
Right.
Taking
Now-
the responsibility away from.
Right. Are you, is that something that might happen in Lebanon?
Yes.
Right. Right. Is that something that might happen in all? Okay, no, says Sandy for Spanish. Okay, for Mexico anyway. Okay, so here's the interesting thing about that. Because that's exactly what Tannen found. Deborah Tannen found when she did her gender-based research. Now, not in a classroom, in this time in the workplace. But it was so interesting. Even as small a linguistic strategy as choice of pronoun can affect who gets credit. In my research in the workplace, I heard men say I in situations where I heard women say we. For example, one publishing company exec said, I'm hiring a new manager. I'm going to put him in charge of my marketing division as though he owned the corporation. In stark contrast, I recorded women saying we when referring to work they alone had done. One woman explained that it would sound too self-promoting to claim credit in such an obvious way by saying, I did this. Yet she expected, sometimes vainly, that others would know it was her work and would give her the credit she did not claim for herself. Interesting, right? Because this is what we get a lot. Robin, you look like you want to, yeah. So this is what we get a lot, that on the one hand, and you can see how problematic this is, right? on the one hand, we're supposed to be minimizing the difference. And then on the other hand, we're supposed to be taking power linguistically in situations. So, like you say, you know, maximizing the difference between us and the students, if we're a woman particularly. So what do you think about this?
It actually there's a small thing that I can relate to from my experience. When I started with the CLT thing, I was very new to it. I just got myself the training.
Communicative language teaching.
So I completely transitioned from the teacher-centered classroom to student-centered classroom. And I still remember the student's face who gave me that feedback when I started with all the new teaching technique stuff. He said, "Hey, what are you going to teach us?" Because it's all about their work. And
right. Let's do this now.
Yeah.
Right. What are you gonna do?
Yeah.
Interesting. And what did you do, Nana? How did you respond?
I smiled and I told him, "You will get to the purpose that I have in mind for this class in a few weeks from now." And he did, and he kept registering in my classes after that. He got used to it.
Right.
And it was a beginner's class, so they had no very, very low English level, and he was expecting a lot of input from me. And I was taking it away from me and putting it all on the students, because that's what we should do, minimize teacher. Right.
Minimize TTT.
Yeah.
Teacher talking time. Yeah, I find this very interesting. There was a whole thing in the 90s, particularly about how to be a woman in business. And there was a lot of things, Robin's laughing too. There was a lot of things that included things like don't use pronouns, that incorporate other people, like we. Don't use rising intonation, because it makes you sound like you don't know what you're talking about. Can't remember what else. Do you remember any others, Robin? That there was, don't use certain adjectives because they make you sound like a woman, particularly color adjectives, like only women say chartreuse or something like that. Men don't. So yeah, we had a whole litany of things that we were and weren't supposed to do. But now, of course, we can and when I get this bounce back at me all the time. Now we can review this in light of roles and relationships. Like how do you want to project those roles and relationships, right, linguistically? So, and you can argue, as they have done either way, whether it makes you more or less powerful, but we all understand the symbolism of it. So it's something that's worth thinking about. Do you have something in as we've got people from every other language in the planet here, anything that you were told to do and not to do? As also you're all women, I might add.
The politeness, and I forgot mentioning when we were still talking about the teacher-student power difference, the eye contact, like if we're being told something we shouldn't be doing, like the teacher is saying, like, why did you do this? Or, we cannot have the eye-to-eye contact. It's rude, so you just look at the floor. You look at the floor, right? So you're being told off by your parent. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I hear you. Sandy?
Something that we have mentioned several times in class about the Roman languages having the formal you pronoun.
Yes.
We were strictly, directly taught to use the formal pronoun for your teacher. And if you do not use it, you get corrected. Right.
And that applies whether your teacher's male or female.
It doesn't matter.
Doesn't matter, right.
It's age and power related.
Yeah, because my friends and I have noticed a thing that even if I say I'm Dr. Pickering, people will write to me as Miss Pickering, or even Lucy. But they never do that to Sal. Never once has an undergraduate written to Sal and said, "Hi, Sal." It's always Dr. Hurtado. So that's the reason I'm asking you, because I'm wondering if in practice there might be a change in.
However, now that you mention it, in the classroom, not really, but in the context of business, it might happen that definitely men get more address or
Get more
get more addresses too. Yeah.
It's an interesting. I bet there is research. It's not anything I've looked at. I would imagine there is, but it's very interesting. Anyway, we're going. I'm sort of getting excited about it because Dr. Reed is sitting in the back, so I'm getting excited about gender. But really, we're talking about not just gender, right? We're talking about power differential. So there's institutionally conferred power. There's also situationally negotiated power, right? And we talked about this a little bit earlier. So this can fluctuate with individual interactions and for a whole host of things. But we recognize it. We don't overtly say it, but we recognize it. So for example, power can be temporarily conferred when we're giving directions, right? If someone asks you where something is and then waits for you to give directions, at that point, the power of the conversation is conferred on you. You're the one that says when it starts and when it stops, when you've given the directions, right? Another one is, for example, waiting in a waiting room. All of a sudden, the receptionist or the person has all the power, right? If she tells you to go sit down, you know you're supposed to go sit down, right? Or he tells you to go sit down, you know you're supposed to go sit down. Like all of a sudden, this completely random person is holding, and in this case, there's no power differential. In I'm not talking about when you get inside the doctor's office and he or she gets to control the conversation, just like teacher-student, we know that, but just the sort of situation of you being in someone else's waiting room, it's the someone else's waiting room that has that power, right? And another way you can think about it is any situation where you might actually push back, suggests that there might be some ambiguity in the power being assumed. So if somebody makes a statement, somebody's taking control, we might think of it as mansplaining, for example, but it doesn't have to be a man. And you say something like, well, actually, is that really true? Is that for sure? That is a someone's situation in that situation sort of trying to shift because somebody has taken the power in that conversation and said, whatever usually entirely ridiculous thing it is that they said. And in order for you to push back, you usually have to use some kind of stance marker. So like actually, or I don't know, or well, or something that actually stops that and renegotiates. Okay, so anytime that you have that, you can see where the power is assumed to be. And of course, let's be clear, this can be from the most benign. This might just be a conversation you're having with your friend. I mean, it's the most benign kind of power shifting. I'm not talking about, gatekeeping things necessarily, although obviously it's the same process that goes from everything from the very benign to something like a very important critical gatekeeping encounter. So this marker, like actually, or well, that's interesting because I thought, right, signals potential disagreement. And the speaker is now, the person that was doing the, let's say, mansplaining or whatever, is now in a position of having to justify themselves. If the conversation stops, and you are allowed to make that point, well, actually, they are now in the position, I mean, obviously, language is a choice, so they don't have to justify themselves. They can just keep on banging through if they want to, or they have to stop and say, you know, and reposition themselves to be the one again that's doing the explaining and the taking the lead in the conversation. Any questions? Okay. We're just going to do a couple more slides and we'll take a break. So the other side of solidarity for the other side of powerful roles and relationships in your chapter was solidarity, right? So on the one hand, you have potentially very highly demarcated power relationships, such as asymmetrical interaction, doctor-patient, and so on. On the other hand, we know that we use language very much to build solidarity, right, in group behavior. So we have linguistic demonstrations of building that commonality between people, right? Obviously, there's lots of ways in which we build commonality between people. We might dress similarly, we might, you know, do all kinds of things, you know, eat similarly or whatever, but we're just talking about the linguistics demonstrations of that. So some examples, and there are many obviously, is the use of nicknames that no one else knows. Wasn't it you that in the Enron corpus found Fag Boy? Who was it? I think it was someone outside. Yeah. Someone outside was looking at the nicknames that were used in the Enron corpus. And there were all kinds of nicknames that were coming out, and that was obviously an in-group one. In-group terminology, this is my personal favorite now, onboarding. And I tell you why, because our new thing, you know, trying to get our master's students into our MA in linguistics. So as you know, about a third of them are, what you may not know, but about a third of them are international students. So we need to be very clear, you know, they don't know how to pay, they don't know this, they don't know that. So we started using, I say we, the people that are recruiting started using the term onboarding. And at first I was like, oh my Lord, but now I use it all the time. In fact, I just wrote an email to our new recruiters saying, have you onboarded our students for the fall semester, the spring semester? And I was like, oh God. But so this is now an in-group that it used to be just part of organizational socialization, but is now spreading outwards to all kinds of things because it's kind of a useful term. And then I was reminded of this, just watching Hillel last week, performing an activity linguistically in a group setting. So something like a dissertation proposal defense. So we just watched the dissertation proposal defense. So what were some of the linguistic characteristics of that? So if you think about an example of the non-linguistic characteristics might be, it's usually in a room like the room we were in, on an institutional campus, right? But what might be some of the linguistic things that sort of build this in group? We're all here together to do a linguistics proposal.
Terms used, the topic of it.
Good. Okay, so the terms that we use, absolutely good. All of a sudden, we're in Hillel's oral corrective feedback. So we're all using oral corrective feedback, even though we might not have said it ever before. Yeah.
I have not been present in a defense here in the U.S., but at least in the Spanish world, there is very fixed expressions that you use. For instance, once it's finished, you know, the advisor stands up and says, "We have, you have successfully passed." There is like a script that they follow.
Yeah, and you know, I was on an MA thesis committee in Puebla, and I noticed that. Because she stood up and it was all in Spanish, so I didn't understand it, but she read it out loud. Whereas in this, what do we do here? What did we do with Hillel?
you take questions for when.
Oh, no, when she's done. If she's successfully approved, what did we do? Do you know? I mean, was anyone still there? We go, hello! Yay! You finished! Yeah! Yeah! At least that's what happens to the ones that I've been in. Yeah, it's like, yay, you did it! Yay!
That's
So,
interesting.
yes, yeah, completely different.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. So we can build in the same way that we can situationally negotiate solidarity, situationally negotiate power, we can also situationally negotiate a temporary solidarity, meaning with a stranger, right? Because we don't know this person from Adam. We're not in a situation we're ever likely to be in again. So think of some real world examples where that might happen.
Maybe you're in a queue waiting at the bank and it's slow. And
Good.
you're turning to the person behind you.
Good. Phatic communication is a huge thing. If you're in line and, you know, the cashier suddenly says, oh, wait, I'm timing out, the next cashier is coming in, and you're like, oh, God, and you all look at each other. And, yeah, so any kind of phatic, what we call phatic communication between strangers is real-world example of that kind of temporary solidarity, right? But it only works if it's considered to be genuine and sincere. So let me show you an example of one that's not working, and you can tell me why, and then we'll take a break. So this example is actually a 4-minute clip from a movie. So let's watch this and then.
Hello, everyone. I'm Todd Anderson from Western Novelty, and I'm here to help integrate you into our business. Now, I got to tell you, the center's numbers are nowhere near what they should be. And based on the customer complaints we've been having, it's a culture thing. Basically, you people need to learn about America. Now, it's all about bringing down the MPI. Things go faster if the customer feels they're talking to a native English speaker.
But we are native English speakers. English is the official language of our government. You got it from the British and so did we. We just speak it differently. I mean, sometimes our pronunciation is better. We say internet and you say internet.
Fair enough, but that's exactly my point. I'm asking you to say internet. All right, next time you're on a call, try to listen carefully to the customer's pronunciation, their slang, small talk. Try to learn from them. Learn about America.
Sir.
Yes, you are?
Manmeet.
Man meat.
No, Manmeet. What I want to know is, what is small talk?
Oh, you know, it's like, so how you doing today? How's the weather in Arizona? You can talk about sports.
Like cricket.
All right, never mind. Forget sports. You want to sound American. If anyone asks where you're located, just say Chicago. All right? Try that.
Chicago.
Okay. When you make the ah sound, just hold your nose to flatten the vowel, like Chicago.
Chicago.
It's great. And if anyone asks how the weather is, just say windy. Yes, you are?
Asha, sir. Isn't that a little dishonest? I mean, I'm not going to lie. I'm not in Chicago. I'm in Gharapuri. Look, when I was hired to do this job, I was told that I would be selling products to a customer on a telephone. I did not know we had to be deceptive.
Well, a lot of Americans are upset about outsourcing.
But sir, most of the products they're buying are made in China.
Okay, what else? Yes, man meat.
I do not understand item H403.
H403. Yeah, a lot of Americans wear these to sporting events.
But why, sir?
It's hard to explain. We just do. Yes.
I don't understand the purpose of A221.
A221. That's a burger brand. Americans eat a lot of beef, and some people like to burn their initials into their food with a red-hot iron before they eat it.
Why?
It's like a cattle brand. You know, the thing you use to burn a symbol into a cow with? No, in America, that's how you keep track of your cows. Branding.
With a red hot iron.
Yeah.
But wouldn't the cow run away?
Oh, no, we only do it to baby cows. When they're small enough to hold them down. Yes, Asha?
A suggestion, Mr. Todd.
Go ahead.
You need to learn about India.
First day at school. I want to get him some supplies, but I'm not sure what kids need these days.
Perhaps some rubbers, ma'am.
What did you say?
I mean, if you have a pencil, you need some rubbers, no?
Okay. Who can tell me what was wrong with this call? It's not a rubber. It's an eraser.
No, sir, this is a rubber.
No, it's an eraser. A rubber means condom.
Oh, you mean like a flat? No, they call it an apartment.
No, a condom. Birth control.
Does it work?
Oh, so wonderful. So wonderful. So, in that case, it wasn't working, right? Why wasn't it working?
He was asking them to be not genuine and not sincere.
Right, right. So this solidarity building only works when there really is some genuine solidarity to be had, right? So part of the issue that's come up with these call centers in the Philippines and India that drives Americans and British people and other traditional English speakers crazy is that they make them do that, right? Pretend you're Chicago or whatever, and they're like, oh, I know you're in Manila, so just, yeah. And so instead of building solidarity, it in fact creates even bigger problem in the interaction, which is of course what they're teasing about in that clip. Good. All right, time for a break. Let's take a little 10-minute break. So solidarity only works if it's considered to be sincere, right? So if it's not considered to be sincere, what can happen, not necessarily with the clip that we just watched, but let's say if you've done sociolinguistics, you've heard the term accommodation, and it's going to come back in your book here, which is the idea of accommodating toward, converging towards somebody else's style. So it might be one kind of conversion that we already looked at was when I showed you that tiny clip where the woman goes, is she crazy? Oh, I don't know about crazy, but totally weird. Yeah, totally. Like that is a kind of convergence because you're picking up each other's vocabulary. Another kind of convergence is accent convergence. But what can happen that can go wrong with that? Yeah, because there's a line between mimicry and convergence, right? And that's what's happening here in this clip. Like, the perception is that they're, mimicking and it's driving people crazy. So instead of having this convergence, it operates as a divergent kind of thing. All right, good. So this next one, it was interesting because this is a genuine call center interaction. I had access for a while to an actual call center interaction based in the Philippines, Corpus, and this is from one of them. And they don't tell them to say they're American, but clearly they're, and of course Filipino English is different from Indian English. Filipino English is much closer to American English than Indian English is. So he sounds kind of American, but you're going to see where the culture trap, so the solidarity building that the customer tries, doesn't work because this guy's in the middle of Manila, in fact. So it's a two-parter. So I'm going to play you the first.
Okay, Lane, could you please provide me your new billing address?
Okay, so I'm going to play you the first part, and then the second part's on the next slide. Okay.
Okay, Lane, could you please provide me your new billing address?
It's 2719 Saddle Blanket Place, 3 words.
Saddle, S-A-T-T-L?
S-A-D-D-L-E.
T-T-L-A,
blanket,
okay.
like you'd put on a horse, saddle blanket.
Saddle blanket horse?
Huh?
What is that?
I'm saying saddle blanket, like you would put on a horse, a saddle blanket. It's S-A-D-D-L-E-B-L-A-N-K-E-T-P-L-A-C-E. Saddle Blanket Place, 3 words.
I see. Okay. Saddle blanket horse?
No, man.
I'm sorry, place. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. I'm sorry.
Right. No problem. No problem.
I'm sorry for that.
So that went better than a lot of those interactions go.
Saddle blanket horse?
Stop. So what happened there?
First, he confused the saddle because of the American flag.
Right.
He thought he meant saddle.
Good. So first he confused the flap, right? I'm trying to get back to the previous slide. Yeah, he confuses the, which is of course what was happening when that woman said in the slide, we say internet and you say internet, right? Because it's the same issue. Yeah, okay. And then what's happening? What's the cultural reference that?
He's trying to explain, as in like to make it easier for the Filipino to see if he can get it, like a kind of blanket, as in like a blanket that you
put on a horse, right.
Like totally.
Yeah, he's got nothing, right? He's in the middle of Manila. Who knows if he's even seen a horse, let alone knows that they have a saddle blanket. Right. So in that case, you can see how solidarity building, where he's trying to say, look, dude, I'll help you here, is sort of going wrong. But in this case, this one ends up really well. These are genuine calls, and this guy's a really nice guy. I have other calls where it's very unpleasant. What happens? You can see that happening. Yeah. Combination of this fact of pretend convergence and cultural mismatch, that there's no chance of anybody understanding prior to having the relationship. There's also no chance of you anticipating it, right? So that's the problem. All right, the last thing we're going to talk about that was in your chapter that's about roles and relationships is stance marking, or in American English, stance marking. Stance marking. Which the ways in which interactants create and signal relationships with propositions they give voice to and with the people they interact with. So in other words, it's you using linguistic markers to show what your stance is to something. Like, it's true, you believe it's true, you believe it's not true, you believe it's important, you believe it's not important. And some of the typical linguistic markers that are in your chapter are things like comparative adjectives, right? This is better than, well, I thought that was better. Modals, might, could. Okay, in Alabama, might, could means, well, we might, could, but there's a level of, and we might not, right? Oh, we might, could do that. Means that I'm not saying that we're going to do that, right? My stance towards this is, different from saying we could do that. Yeah, it's a different degree. Adverbs of degree, like that, like maybe, almost, or markers of perspective. So if somebody says, well, apparently, all women use rising intonation in business meetings, right? So just by using that apparently in that way, you're showing that you think this is a ridiculous statement. I mean, it's a stupid example, but you're thinking that it's a ridiculous statement, right? So these are stance markers, and we use them all the time for everything. They also include much more basic markers like. So I was thinking like that, so they include all these kinds of things. And they're super important to sort of grease the social wheels, right? They sort of give you the relationship building part of your interaction, right? So in 2013, with a few other people, I did this stance markers in the workplace. So stance markers allow speaker or writer to indicate personal feelings, attitudes, value, judgment, or assessment. This is from a corpus, a workplace corpus discussion. So it can comprise a number of lexicogrammatical features, which we've just said. Stance adverbials. He's kind of talked himself into it. Complement clauses. I'm very happy that. Modals. I might be up before you go, and so on, right? And what we were interested in was the use of these features in directives. Okay, so directives are let me turn that back to. Directives are control acts, right? Directives are when you're trying to get someone to do something, okay? So it covers directives, requests, advice inside the workplace corpus that we were looking at. And in the language in the workplace sample, so that's what this is, in New Zealand, this is the order of the directives: can, could, might, may, be able to. Imperatives were only reserved for now directives. This is an office-based business corpus. You would have can, have, want to, need to, would. So in other words, there were choices that people made about how they would ask you to do something. Right? Could you, might you, may you be able to, and as you went along, they got more and more, so this would be the most informal, and this would be the most formal, right? Either way, there wasn't any directives in which these did not appear, apart from very basic directives between equals, right, or between intimates. So I was interested, and we've talked about this corpus before. This is my AAC corpus. These are people like Stephen Hawking who can no longer speak with the musculature, so they use machines to speak. And we talked about the fact last time we looked at this corpus that using the machines to speak takes so much time that often they decide not to use the machine, but to use what's left of their musculature to ask people or to respond or whatever. So one of the things we found, because the AAC users take more time to produce their utterances, or because they're doing it with what remains of their voice, things like initiators, control devices, mitigators, solidarity building devices, all these things go out of the window, right? Because there's no time to sort of, you know, say things like, you know, he kind of, I might be, you know, you have, there's just, all of it takes too much time and effort. So what we found with the AAC was there was much less speech in terms of this solidarity building, and many dropped items such as personal pronouns, mitigators, and so on. So I'm going to give you an example of this. This is an AAC user who wants to stay in the time stream. So you remember we talked about the fact that if you're an AA user, you have to make a decision. If you do have some of your musculature left, you have to say, am I going to stay in the time stream and try and use that? Or am I going to go outside the time stream of the conversation and type everything in and hope everybody waits for me to get that done, right? So this is an AAC user, and you'll hear him say, yeah, over here, yeah, this is, notice that there's no, actually, I'm not sure whether that's his device or not. I don't think so. But what you hear is his helper, speaker 2, let me go quickly and pick up Sarah's food. I'll be right back. He vocalizes over the top of that, and she says, okay. And what he's actually saying, it'd be interesting if you can hear it, probably not, but he says, thank you, throw away. Speaker 2 says, you're what? And he says, throw away. Speaker 1 recognizes him as saying, throw it away. In other words, there's something that she's holding. So speaker 2 then says, throw away this, and he says, aha, this one, yeah, let me shred it because it's got stuff in here, right? So the directive is coming from the AAC user, but unlike directives we would typically expect in a workplace, this is very bold, right? Bold on record because of these issues with. So let's have a listen and you can hear that happening.
Do you want that over here, Larry, in the corner?
Yeah.
I'm gonna go quickly and pick up Sarah's food. I'll be okay. You away? Throw it away, this one? Let me shred it because it's got stuff in here.
Interesting, huh? So could you hear him say, throw away? Yeah. Yeah. So this we found over and over and over again, and it was interesting because even though you know, they know, and the speakers know that they can't help this kind of sort of, you know, pigeonized interaction, they hate it. Because when you look at what they actually say, this is what they say. So they use directives and modals minimally, and when asked what the priority of AAC research should be, they prioritize things that allow them to do everyday things such as make and keep new friends, meaning give me the power to be a real interactional, social human being and do the things that people do linguistically to promote that solidarity between people. And one of the best things I read was about this was this quote here. It's incumbent upon us to gain a better understanding of real-time social interactive aspects of communication for individuals with complex communication needs, so AAC users, and eliminate the device-related access boundaries that currently limit social participation. So again, part of this is how might we be able to improve devices so that some of these markers, some of these linguistic solidarity markers might actually be accessible to the speakers because they know what they're missing and they know what it sounds like. So that's sort of pretty interesting about stance. Okay. So, any questions or comments about all of that? Anything from the chapter that you'd like to go over? Pretty clear? Okay, so for your reading post, I want you to respond to 5.1 on page 149. It's a nice little example. Yeah, so this is an excerpt from a transcript of a softball team, and it's asking you to talk about institutional power. So this is the idea of signaling institutionally conferred power through the interaction, through who gets to make choices about who speaks next, what kind of language is used, and so on. Okay? Questions? All right, we are done. Thanks, everybody. Thanks at home. See you next week.